And hello, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's Monday evening here on the East Coast, 8 p.m. And we are very glad to have Bill Taylor join us one more time. It's always a pleasure, Bill. Thanks for joining us tonight. And we kind of came up with a topic today as we were talking back and forth on the chat to see what we wanted to discuss tonight. And you were right picking up on the show that I had this morning, which touched upon some of the amazing reporting in the book Dope Inc. This book here I've still got next to me by the editors of Executive Intelligence Review, in which basically they're putting just about every line of organized crime and secret society in America kind of traces back to the British and Lord Palmerston. You've done a lot of work in this area, looking into the financing of the Confederacy. And, we mentioned a number of names in the show this morning that you have identified in a chart that you posted on your Twitter this afternoon. So it's an interesting topic. I hope you'll forgive me for the pun in the title, but the birth of the nation seemed to be inevitable when you think about the reality of the British influence and bringing in both the benign birth in the before the Civil War, and then of course the D.W. Griffith movie and the financing of what becomes Hollywood, all a British operation in furtherance of the empire. So let's go back to where we were talking today, and you also made a number of very intriguing Twitter tweets, I should say, along the lines of the Prodom family and JFK. And so I'm looking forward to you unfolding that for us as well. So again, thank you and welcome. And let's get into it.
Sure. Well, one of my favorite things to do is to connect these old timey families and old school conspiracies to present conspiracies, because as a broad thesis, I think that it's a certain amount of families who were involved in these both the historical conspiracies and in these more recent ones. The whole effort began with looking into Robert Mueller a couple of years ago, when he was after President Trump and his fake Russia hoax investigation. I guess the Durham report is out today. I haven't seen it, but it pretty much solidifies that the entire Russian investigation was premised on misinformation or disinformation, as they say now. So the part of that effort, looking into Robert Mueller, was looking at his family tree. And he does come from a very wealthy family, and he's got very wealthy relatives. And you see signs of connections to Rockefeller families and the Rothschild families, and also the DuPonts as well. So just from Robert Mueller, you can't almost help but think that there's more going on here than just say a hatred of Donald Trump, or if you want to take a more recent tragedy / conspiracy, the 9/11 was probably just not a bunch of Saudi Arabian terrorists who were out to fly planes, and that's sort of coming back to haunt the CIA. But in Robert Mueller's family tree, pretty close is Richard Bissell. Richard Bissell, we speak about a lot. He was the CIA director of plans under Eisenhower and under Kennedy. JFK fired Richard Bissell in 1961 for the failed Bay of Pigs effort. Actually, Bissell didn't leave until February of '62, and that's another story. But Bissell is the first cousin once removed to Robert Mueller, the Russiagate.
Bill, I'm going to jump in just because I think folks that are not familiar with the McDuff story and my dad's history, I think it's worthwhile to mention the connection to Richard Bissell. Richard Bissell is Richard M. Bissell Jr., his father, Richard M. Bissell Sr., was the principal of the Hartford Fire Insurance Company, which is one of the oldest and most well endowed financially insurance companies that ever existed. It was founded way back in the early 1840s, I think, or even before that. At any rate, my father's uncle, who you can read about in the book, Uncle John, was a employee of the Hartford Fire Insurance Company, and Richard Bissell Jr. Was maybe about 10 years older than my dad, but they lived not too far away from one another, and it's really a tragic thing to think that Richard M. Bissell Jr. Was very much on the inside of the people that would have made a decision to cancer side or do what they had to do to get rid of my dad. So that, I think, context when we're talking about my show, my mission to expose and use my dad's life as an example of how we've got to turn this thing around. We've got to get back. And as I said earlier on my Twitter this morning, MAAA, make America America again. This is a very personal thing for me. So I just wanted, when you mention a person like Richard M. Bissell, he is one of the self-described man-eating shark. Let's leave it there.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe him, and it should be appreciated how high he was in the CIA. He really only answered to Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was at the top. He had, I guess, the executive director with General Cabell, and then you had 4 deputy directors. One of them was Richard Bissell. The other one was Robert Amory, and there was 2 administrative type deputies in there. But Richard Bissell was the first cousin once removed to Robert Swan Mueller, which means that he was the first cousin to Bob Mueller's mom. And I know there's always debate about what a first cousin once removed is and what a second cousin is. First cousin once removed is. I won't get into the particulars, but it's about as close as a cousin you can get. But Bissell, of course, has a very interesting family history. Among the other, I believe the vacuum cleaner company is named after one of the Bissells. They were very involved in the coal mining wars in the 1920s. But it's the name has been around. I think they might have come over on the Mayflower. They've been in this country a long time.
Yeah, and there's a number of branches, of course.
Right. But Bissell had a sister, and so during the Bissell family tree a couple of years ago now, it came across an interesting character. Richard Bissell's sister, was married to a gentleman named Hector Prudhomme. I'm going to call him Hector Jr. He's not really a junior. There's a P and an S. Hector P. Prudhomme, and then there's Hector S. Prudhomme. I always get him confused, but we're just going to use the junior and senior for now because they both come into play. So Hector Jr. Hector Prudhomme Jr. was married to Richard Bissell's sister, and there's a decent amount of information on Hector Jr. in the various CIA files. He was working for the World Bank in the early 1950s and was one of the CIA helpers in the overthrow of Mogadishu in Iran in 1953 and the installation of the Shah of Iran. It's quite an eclectic group because we've run into a number of people who were involved in the COVID hoax now. The de Blasio family, they're almost entirely involved in this 1953 coup. But this Prudhomme fellow accompanied, and I could probably pronounce the name on Tocqueville Reiber, who was at one point the president of Texaco until he was dismissed in 1940 for trading with the Nazis. So the both of them, Prudhomme and Reiber, show up in Tehran, in 1953 as World Bank agents, to basically divvy up the goods. So Prudhomme is definitely a CIA name. His father was very, very deeply involved. I believe that they're Belgian, but now I'm sort of having doubts about that now. But let's just say that they are Belgian. His father, Hector Sr., was very instrumental in helping to get the American public and American government to support the to support sending soldiers to Europe during World War One. He was Hector Prudhomme Sr. was part of the propaganda effort on the Belgian or Euro side of the effort to spread propaganda and convince the rest of the world and convince normal Americans that the Germans were raping and pillaging Belgium, and that the American aid and American soldiers were desperately needed. And that's the reliability of those accounts of Germans throwing babies into the air and spearing them with pitchforks is now entirely debatable. But you can see that they never stop. Just to go back to the de Blasio real quick, de Blasio's grandfather was very instrumental in helping on the U.S. side of that effort as a PR man working with Edward Bernays. I'm throwing a lot of names out. So I have this name Prudhomme in my head, and it's not an uncommon name. It's very common in Maine. It's where there was a number of French Canadians. Very common in the French part of Canada. It's very common in Louisiana. So when you find a very a relatively common name, it's difficult to come up with any connections. Unlike, say, stroke, there's only 300 strokes in the country, in the United States. But there's thousands of Prudhommes. Nevertheless, this is where things get kind of interesting and brings things into more of the present rather than Iranian coups in '53 or World War One. And we're going to go back to the Civil War before we're done. But there was a witness at the assassination of RFK, who was it was a young girl, a 14-year-old girl, working for the campaign apparently, but as a 14-year-old volunteer. She went to the Ambassador Hotel with a couple friends from. She was from the San Fernando Valley, and wherever she was in the Ambassador Hotel, the Los Angeles Police Department did decide to take a statement from her, and she does give there is at least a one-page reference to what she said she saw, and essentially what this 14-year-old girl says is that she saw some unsavory characters, and she saw the woman in the polka dotted dress. We won't get too much into who the woman in the polka dotted dress is, but it's sort of it's sort of what the RFK assassination. What's a good way of putting it? The highlight. Who is this mystery woman? And it's never been figured out who this woman was, who was wearing a polka dotted dress and went running from the Ambassador Hotel, apparently screaming or yelling, "We got him! We got him!" Meaning that we had gotten RFK. But anyway, this girl, 14-year-old Jeanette Prudhomme, gave a statement to the police, and that was that for Jeanette Prudhomme. You don't really hear anything about her ever again, and why would you? She's only 14 years old. But the name always stuck out with me because, under the premise that the Sirhan did not act alone to shoot RFK, and that it was part of a broader conspiracy, you have to wonder, that sounds like something that the CIA's former director of plans might have planned, and that would be Richard Bissell, whose brother-in-law is a gentleman named Hector Prudhomme. So still, Jeanette Prudhomme is 14 years old. She lives in San Fernando Valley in California. The Prudhommes of the Bissells are related to are mostly from, they're apparently from Belgium, but they're mostly East Coast Prudhommes. They had a property in Maine, and there really shouldn't be any connection there, at least geographically.
If I may, I just had a thought. I remember watching this Cajun chef named Paul Prudhomme. Do you remember him?
Yes. Yeah.
A big guy with a beard, and did a cooking show that was kind of fun. I think on PBS or something. Well, anyway,
Right.
I noticed, he's from Louisiana. Louisiana, of course, the core of that beginning of the mafia, the Jesuit foothold of long standing, and the center of a lot of intrigue, including much of it related to the JFK assassination. So I just mentioned that Prudhomme family. Who knows? Maybe there's a New Orleans connection.
Oh, there is a New Orleans connection. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
It's a very thick one. So the interesting thing about the Prudhomme family of California, of the San Fernando Valley, look very pedestrian. They're into the cars, drag racing cars. Her brother, Jeanette's brother, was basically a street racer in 1968. I think the family owned a body shop in the San Fernando Valley. This is not Belgian aristocracy type of trade. This is blue collar California culture, and so just looking into the history of the Prudhommes of California, they do come from Louisiana. They're actually direct descendants of the Prudhomme family of Louisiana, which at one point owned the largest cotton plantation on the west side of the Mississippi River in Louisiana. I actually have stats in a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago. I think they owned 146 slaves. That's worth about $3.5 million in today's money. Thousands of acres. The Prudhomme, the California blue collar Prudhommes, definitely came from money at one point. I don't want to get sidetracked because that takes us down another route. I want to stick with Jeanette for now. But there's a little bit of my thesis is that this wealthy Louisiana family, the Prudhommes, they're not as pedestrian as they look. At first glance.
Well, one could easily speculate that they lost a lot in the Civil War.
Oh, easily, yeah. But it appears that there's papers there. I haven't gone through really many of them, but they kept a decent amount of wealth. I mean, the Union soldiers burnt their plantations to the ground as well, but maybe that's where deals are cut as well. Anyway, so they do come from a very pretty wealthy family, where things get even more interesting. So, and I might get this a little bit confused. Now I have to think about. I might have to look up the name. Somebody could look it up for me. One of the Prudhomme's relatives is Julia Childs. Now this is the Prudhommes of the East Coast Prudhommes. Julia Childs was married to. That's her married name. She's married to the Childs family, which were big Boston blue blood bean eating types, merchant banking, opium trading, you name it. They were in that business for years. But she was a West Coast girl, and there are hints, and I would not be surprised if some of this information was scrubbed, which makes it difficult to find. There are hints that she had some sort of connection to the Prudhommes of California as well. One of the more interesting coincidences of this Prudhomme in California family, especially Jeanette, was that at the age of there's an interview with her in some local Maine paper, and it's cited on my website, where she goes to visit family who she never describes who it is, in Bangor, Maine. And as coincidence would have it, Bangor, Maine is basically where the Bissell family had their family compound for the past 120 years, very close to the Rockefeller Island, somewhat north of Kennebunkport. But there's from the insinuation, from sort of reading between the lines, it appears that there's Jeanette Prudhomme in the 1980s was summering in Bangor, Maine, which seems like a weird place for a San Fernando girl to summer. She met her husband, who was a pastor in a local Bangor church, and they got married in the 1980s, and they moved there. So the place where she moved, it's essentially right down the road from where the East Coast Bissell connected Prudhommes had their cottage. And I've never been able to find a definitive connection or family tree which puts the California Prudhommes, the witness to the RFK assassination, in the same family tree as Richard Bissell and Hector Prudhomme, the CIA guys. But there's a lot of overlapping and coincidence between these California Prudhommes and these East Coast establishment Prudhommes with the Bissells, which at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, calls into question the reliability of the witnesses' statements that Jeanette Prudhomme gave to the LAPD in 1968 when RFK was shot, and whether she wasn't playing, as George Webb would say, playing a part in a school play to maybe steer this in a direction that the darker forces wanted to bring it.
Well, it seems like if you have a polka dot dress on, that you're not there to hide.
Right.
You're there to get seen. And so is she a decoy to, and the real crooks are,
Going the other way.
Yeah.
Right. And you're adding, there's a couple other relatives there. I won't get too deep into it, that sort of imply that she would know who the Jeanette Prudhomme, or at least her parents, she was only 14, would know who these other Prudhommes are on the East Coast, and that's CIA. Like I said, CIA all the way. I think it's just too many coincidences there. Where things possibly get more speculative, but this is how I think that the deep state kind of works. If you play your cards right with the deep state, if you play ball, if you keep your mouth shut when you're supposed to, or say the right things when you're supposed to, you get rewarded. They'll try and reward you first, and if you don't take the reward, well, then they're probably going to take you out. But it's interesting that Jeanette Prudhomme's brother goes on to have probably the most successful career in drag racing of any race car driver in the world, and not just drag racing, but he owned teams in. I'm not sure if he owned NASCAR teams, but he was a big shot in in the motorsports circuit for decades. Not just as a participant, especially in drag racing in the 1970s, but also as a team owner through the 80s, 90s. I believe he's still alive. He was up until at least a year and a half ago. You know, sponsors, contracts, anything you can want. Yeah, if you wanted to take your hobby of street racing into the lucrative world of professional drag racing, you know, I'm just saying he might have had some help along the way.
Yeah, all of those types of really high dollar sports, if you call them sports, are s- places where money changes hands. And who knows exactly what really was the real value of that carburetor, or you know, that secret sauce that they put into the gasoline. How much was that really worth?
Right.
Um, and what was going on behind the scenes. I, 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 I'm sure that drag racing is completely clean, though. That's just me.
It seems like a very clean sport.
Seems
Um,
like it. Yeah, a lot of nice fellas.
yeah, uh, it is.
And, and
We
Patrick,
have a
what's her
drag.
name? Daniel Patrick. What's her name? The Patrick woman.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even know. I'm not a big NASCAR follower.
Me neither. But sometimes there comes along a special woman in a racing suit that just kind of remember Seven of Nine. I mean,
Right.
there's a certain effect that's certain. Never mind, Bill. It's late. Let's get back to what we were talking about, the banking and stuff. Like today in my show, reading from Dope Incorporated, uh, the, the uh, names of Lehman and Lazard pop up as the beginnings of their empires in New Orleans, coming in along with the beginnings of the Italian mafia. The stories that all of these mafias and secret societies are agents of the British Empire, sent into action in the 19th century by, at this time, Lord Palmerston, at other times, Benjamin Disraeli, and other figures from time to time that are kind of the head of the secret Freemasonic empire in Great Britain. Well, people say that Britain was almost going to side with the South, but then they changed their mind halfway through when they realized the South was going to lose. That's the standard story we get from our books, and then it's pretty much done with. But you've done a lot of research. I've dug into it myself, into such things as the Knights of the Golden Circle, and I find, the Dope Inc. book is telling me that whole thing was financed by the Jewish financiers that came along with the same groups in in the form of B'nai B'rith, when B'nai B'rith was just begun, and as an agent of the British Jewish banking families, the Rothschilds, etc. So let's go there and connect that to things that are going on today, because I think these, uh, as you say, the old families that were powerful back then, they uh, they reach into our lives today in many ways. That if we understand where they came from, maybe we can do something that straighten things out a little bit, get back to what we hope our country is really supposed to be about, because these oligarchical families are very destructive.
Completely. I mean, what I really find interesting is the is the Rothschild family, and I would argue that those probably the ones behind the the British Empire and sort of the motivations for what the British uh, British faces or the Parliament or Prime Minister or royal family might be up to. But yeah, just some basic history which I never knew. I think the cotton gin was invented in the 1890s by a Yale guy, Whitney, and the Rothschilds acquired the patent. It's not exactly clear how it was acquired or what was involved, but by 1810, one of the Rothschild sons was operating mills in. They had formed Rothschild LIM, I think it was called, or LM, and was had these huge had invested in huge textile mills in the UK, and this was a function of the cotton gin making cotton belt, or southern United States cotton, economical to harvest with slave labor, process with this new cotton gin, which was the most labor intensive part of it. So that makes it a lot cheaper to ship, and then shipping these fibers to out of the port of New Orleans and the ports of Memphis or Mobile, Galveston, to these British mills, and the Rothschild family certainly built a legitimate textile businesses out of the cotton that came out of the American South. But that you can almost see that's where they started making. That's where they first made their inroads into the North, from what I can tell, North American banking and finance system. And they were probably the only banking and finance system, banking and finance entity that actually had the capital to ship cotton from deep up the Mississippi through the port of New Orleans, and then all the way across the ocean, or if not all the way across the ocean, then to New England for processing. So you have a whole financial structure involved there that requires bankers. Somebody's got to issue letters of credit, issue insurance for freight insurance, export financing. You need a banking system. You need an agent in New Orleans to cut the check that's then carried all the way to London on the ship, and then it could be cash there. And the Rothschilds would really be the only entity capable of that. Along that way, you're using you're developing a network of finance houses through the South, like Lehman Brothers, like what was the other one? Solomon Brothers as well. I believe Goldman Sachs had a part of that business. Alex Brown and Sons definitely had a part of that business, and you sort of these are known now as, and people forget, but they're known now as separate banks. But at one point, they all would have been tied into the capital, to the liquidity of a huge banking empire like the Rothschilds, which really only had they had the money. There's just no banks could have handled it. None of the North American banks would have been able to handle cross-border financing and the letters of credit required to get paid once the cotton is dropped off in London, or to buy cotton on the New Orleans docks and get paid up front for it. Even by the Civil War, by the Civil War, it was a pretty vast network. And I've written a separate piece on this, but you have the Confederates, the Confederate government, looking to finance their war effort through the issuance of cotton bonds, which was a bond that was collateralized by bales of cotton. So potentially you have the Prudhomme family, any other large plantations who were required to actually give up their gold and silver for the Confederate effort. Coming up with the more manageable and less intrusive method to finance the war, which would be to pledge their bales of cotton to the Confederate government, which then in turn used it as collateral to raise money in Europe to fund the war effort. And one of the bigger banks that I went to was called Erlanger. And you see the name Erlanger Brothers. Erlanger Brothers was a Paris-based investment bank whose partner had spun himself off from Rothschild in Frankfurt, and they were able to finance, I want to say, around $70 million, a decent amount for the day, of cotton bonds, which were used to to fund a war effort. On you see, like I said, you see these names. There's an Erlanger, Kentucky, which is named after the family who was financing the Confederate effort. If you really want a conspiracy, that's where Wayfair has its central distribution facility. If you remember the Wayfair controversy.
All I know about Wayfair is that's where I get my shelves from.
They're supposedly selling kids out of the catalog.
No.
Back 2 years ago.
Oh, well, they couldn't have.
I don't know if you.
No, I don't believe that.
Yeah, but it is. They are based out of Erlanger, which is basically a Rothschild set up city. It's financed, was put on the map by the later on when the railroads came through. It was financed by railroad money. But yeah, you have. I think that the system of financing in the American South, but not necessarily just the South, but also the mills in the North, made a lot of families beholden to Rothschild's agent banks, who were in turn indebted to the Rothschild euro based central bank, essentially.
And the August Belmont is listed as their agent, basically in the United States. In the Confederacy, you have the very curious character of Judah P. Benjamin, who is reported again by the EIR folks to be the head of the B'nai B'rith and the chief that's running these financing schemes. Without that financing, as you said, and it had to be foreign financing to finance a whole government the size of the Confederacy. It's clear that they needed the financing, but the connection between these Jewish financiers and the British, the Lord Palmerston, the people that are basically running Britain on behalf of the oligarchical families and the royalty, are very, very much against the end of slavery. They're very much for the continuation of slavery so that this cotton keeps on coming. And the idea that is mentioned in a lot of people's books, but still hasn't hit the mainstream, the big stage yet, of course, is the idea that, Great Britain, our so-called mother country, was behind the great conflict, the Civil War itself. But the financing behind it, the connection of these banking schemes to the British foreign minister and the cabinet and the interests of the British, and then of course the dark side of it too, the opium economy. Of course, the Civil War becomes a wonderful boon for the morphine business that they're happy to supply. This looking at Britain as a major cause of the Civil War, I think, is something we ought to really consider, because once again we're faced with Britain seeming to do things that are against American interest, and the American people are in this kind of haze I would say 90% of the American people are very happy to consider Great Britain as the mother country and delighted to watch the coronation and the ceremonies on the television and all. So there's been uh, uh, a kind of a blanket of misperception laid across our history. And now we're stuck with a big problem, and that is that nobody can think that the British would actually do the things that we see the British doing. See what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, definitely. But I would say that within the past couple of years, it's gone from 99% willing of the people willing to, uh, you know, the only the Lyndon LaRouche types were the only ones really railing against the British 4 or 5 years ago, before all hell broke loose. But
Yeah.
I would say there's more of an awareness of some evil intentions of the British family and their masters. You know, you certainly Prince Andrew and his relationship with Jeff Epstein certainly shines a light from one angle. You see these. I, I would just emphasize that I think people are waking up. So maybe you can't do much with 1%, but if you can get to 10%, you start to maybe make some headway. You know, what do they say about the American Revolutionary War? 1/3 were loyalists, 1/3 were patriots, 1/3 could care less. Maybe you just have to get to that 1/3 number, and I would even argue we're winning. I mean, I see the Jimmy Dore types and the and Bill Maher's and nice liberal like Garland Nixon. Uh, and there's probably a few Brett Weinstein, his brother Eric Weinstein, Naomi Wolf, coming to our side. You don't see anybody jumping over to the dark side. You see sort of these liberals becoming suddenly standing up for their liberal hippie principles and coming to our side. So I remain optimistic. As long as this more information gets out, you just kind of sort of have to feed people information, because some people are just never going to get it. But if you get to a certain number, maybe a 1/3 number, then maybe that's helpful. I would add about just the book about the Rothschilds and our gang. Is that what it's called? I'm thinking of the Spanky and Alfalfa.
Yeah, our crowd.
Our crowd. It's a very specific, and I like to emphasize this too. It's a very specific subset of families that not only do they all marry each other, okay, they're all business partners. They all come from the same part of Europe, and they might, I would argue they're probably hiding behind a religious front to sort of dissuade people from asking questions or calling them out. An example is another famous Confederate head muckety muck was John Slidell.
Yeah.
He was a senator from Louisiana. He was the treasurer of for the Confederacy. He held the title of treasurer. I don't think titles meant very much during the Confederacy, but he was the one who negotiated the sale of the cotton bonds to the banking houses in Europe, and returned with the money. He was almost captured in Cuba. But the Slidell family is very interesting because it's, and I've heard this from a couple places. I don't have the source on me right now, but they were generally they're considered confirmed Frankists, which is essentially saying confirmed Illuminati. Followers of the Jacob Frank Sabbatean form of the minority religion they like to hide behind. You can almost argue that they're the the minority religion for their own benefit. And he connects to his daughter married Commodore Matthew Perry, and there's reason to believe that he comes from a long Frankish family. So not only have it's one thing to say Jewish bankers, but it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But there's a way to get around it, and it's truthful. And you can argue they're not Jewish at all. They're Frankish. They're anti-Jewish. They have closer connections to some of these Jesuit types of orders really than anything else. Get back to the Jesuit conspiracy. But
well, may I jump in and say I'm glad to hear you say that. I agree with you, and it agrees with my recent readings of the author David Livingstone and his big book called Ordo Ab Chao. I don't know if you've run across that yet or not, but he has a number of chapters devoted to both Frankism and one which I intend to read soon about the Kavad Lubavitch. And it'll be very interesting to hear what folks, our subscribers and friends think about this material when I read it. I find it to be pretty shocking, but also it rings true. And when you say that you can look at these people and say no, that this is not anti-Semitic because these are Frankists. They are not Jewish. There is documentation for that, and David Livingstone in his book says that at some point they converted to Christianity, so that they're Frankists within their idea of some way that can be Christian. But the title of his section on that, I think, speaks volumes, and the title is Salvation Through Sin.
Right. That's Sabbateanism, salvation through sin.
And so what's the effect of that frame of mind upon the banking and the politics that we talk about?
Right. I mean, it has a total effect. All morality and ethics go out the window. It's to the point where they're hiding behind this minority religion, or the argument's made that there's plenty of Christian Frankists as well, or there are Christian Frankists, and maybe centered around the Jesuits. But we would call them anti Satanists, or if they practice a black mass, so we wouldn't call them a Catholic, and we because everything is inverted, in this
right.
In this system. But it's a real system. It's a real at all. That's the sort of the underlying philosophy behind Jeffrey Epstein's willingness to sell 13-year-old girls to the highest bidder. You have to have a twisted mind, almost more of a twisted mind behind your own psychosis. You need a religion to do that kind of evil.
That's what I've been thinking for some time now when I confront the idea of Satanism and this the temple of Satan, and they have these after school Satan clubs they talk about on the internet. The idea of promoting Satanism and it's the same type of thing where that's not what we want. That's not the kind of citizens we want. We want people that are going to respect and try to grow and try to enhance. That's what JFK said. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Who would do that today? Who would say, hey, let me do something for my country. I'm not going to worry about my 401k anymore. A lot of people, I guess the answer is, a lot of people will do that because we are in a very serious bind right now, and it is time to get up, stand up, and take some risks, because when you see what's happening, uh, silence just doesn't feel comfortable. So I'm going to keep
No,
speaking out.
that's
I'm
right.
sure you are too.
Knowledge helps. Right. I think the knowledge helps because it changes the conversation away from being everybody's an answer. No, it's just satanic cult that has both Christians and Jews in it, and Muslims too. They're known as the Donmei in Turkey, and they practice an inverted form of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, and then they hide behind legitimate, the legitimate, portions of whatever religion they primarily practice. Um,
And
you
that, of
see, I don't
course,
know if my Twitter account all the time has ADL. You almost think we must be getting close to something because I have more tweets from the ADL. I don't think I've signed up for anything
oh
from
boy,
the
look
ADL.
out, 'cause, the next thing you know, you'll be quoted as saying some horrible thing about our Jewish brethren and sisters, and
Well,
uh,
they're going to anyway. So you might as well say, well, it's really not, it has nothing to do with Judaism. You're just hiding behind Judaism. It's just hiding behind you know, the Jesuit, some off the wall
I,
Jesuit order is just hiding behind the Catholic Church to do
and
whatever damage they think they can do.
this is one of the big controversies that I was also talking about this morning on the show, which is, are the Jesuits still an independent entity, or have they just been subsumed as another arm of this one uh, big empire, the Dope Inc. empire? Because, obviously, the Habsburgs, they lost power, right? There's no more Austro-Hungarian Empire. Th- they can put their Klaus Schwab out there and talk big and all, but do they really have the money anymore, or is it all really just the British and the old extensions of the Palmerston system, where they would control the Jesuits, they would control the Freemasons, they would control the B'nai B'rith, and they would control the Donmei, in order to control the society and to take care of those that need to get disappeared, uh, using the evil side of that bargain that they have to strike. It's useful to the elites to create these secret societies that 90% of the members might not have any idea that they all actually answer to the British royal family, for instance. But anyway, what's your opinion? Do you think it's all run out of London, or do you think there's still a sizable power structure in the Catholic Church, or specifically the Knights of Malta, or the Society of Jesus, or do you feel like it's still too obscure to venture a guess?
You know what? Yeah, I mean, it is obscure to venture guess. This is what, and I think I tweeted about this a couple of weeks ago, which is a path that I like to go down, but it's time consuming. Um, you see the Jesuit, you see that there's a lot of Jesuit influence on the Catholic Church to this day, and it comes and it's been going on for a very long time. And one of the coincidence, or one of the points of interest that sort of got me interested in this was the Zelensky's persecution of Orthodox Christians in Ukraine. Uh, Ukraine is made up of 80% Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and then there's a small 9% are Catholic, Roman Catholic, and but they're not persecuting the Roman Catholics; they're persecuting the Orthodox.
Hmm.
And you sort of look into the history of the Roman Catholic Church in Ukraine, and it's a very recent arrival. It came in the late 1600s, and mostly in the southern part of Ukraine, near the in Galatia, in the near the Polish border. And you really, I've read some obscure stuff, and who knows how reliable it is, but there was the idea is that the Jesuits brought this brought this Catholic Church to Ukraine, and they've been using it to sort of infiltrate the Western, the Roman Catholic Church, the Pontiff, the Vatican, ever since. The number of countries actually have recent Catholic churches formed within the past 200 or 300 years, where it was mostly Ukrainian, and they still go by the Ukrainian Catholics could still marry, priests could still marry, which is kind of interesting. But I guess my point is, it looks like there's some sort of influence that has been going on for a long time from the East, from the Eastern Catholic churches, not the Orthodox Church, and they still might have a hold on this whole sort of control of the Vatican and the Western Catholic churches. Somebody's got to bring the bad stuff, and it looks like, and behind all that, the first Catholics in Ukraine were the Jesuits, who were they're on mission. Looks like more to corrupt and to do anything else.
Well, I'm going to put you in the "I'm not sure yet" category. I think it's just something we have to keep trying to pull back many, many layers. There's so many layers over this stuff, but I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think I agree with you. I'm optimistic that people are going to start pulling on some of the strings that you see. You look at part, I look at part. Hundreds and hundreds of people are looking into the background behind the kind of narrative that we've been fed through the Rockefeller history and the effects of psychological manipulation through propaganda, or our friendly public relations experts from Bernays and Lippmann and all those guys. Yeah, and the financing involves dark forces, and we see that, and we can also, I think, help people make better choices in the future by revealing some really dark stuff in the past. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. It was good.
All right. All right. Thank you, Bill. All right. It's been a great pleasure. The name of your website again is Deep State Analytics, right?
Yeah. D-state-research.com.
A D-state.
It'll Google. Google hasn't destroyed it yet. So.
All right. Deep State Analytics, or D-state-research.com.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Good night now. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. with Hervoye Morich, a second show with him. I'm going to dig into his opinions about current political ideas, like what is neoliberalism? And I think that'll be fun. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you again, Bill. Good night, everyone.